This legislative aspect, I would almost prefer to refer to Congressman Paul. Of course, there are different things. There's Board of Governors. There are all sorts of different levels where we can get some information now, 5 years after the fact, and so now we know where Ben Bernanke stood on the interest rate question in 2003. But but on a question like this that really deals with a technical detail, I would refer it instead to Dr. Paul.
Why don't I yield to Dr. Paul? I don't know if he was listening.
Well, certainly not permanently, but I want to hear about them someday. You know, they claim they release these anyway after years, but I think sooner the better. But obviously, we don't want to monitor them, look at them, you know, the next day or the next week. But I would think that maybe 3 months or 6 months would be reasonable.
I look forward to working with you on this because I would hope that we could pass legislation, and if we can take away the Fed's best argument against it, I think that may help us.
Or we could wait for the movie. The gentleman from California.
Wait for the movie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume that one of the reasons that the Federal Reserve made an error on setting the interest rates too low for such a long period of time, and other central banks followed suit, was because in the 30s there had been a real problem with the Fed setting interest rates too tight. Frankly, I think what transpired is, again, the Fed thought deflation was going to be a problem, and as a result, they set negative interest rates, and they set those negative interest rates 4 years running. I asked Mr. Alvarez this question, but I really believe that that was part of what created the balloon in asset prices, and I suspect you'd agree with me. As I had said, von Mises, his study on business cycle theories, showed the propensity of central banks to do that. But what worries me most right now is the study in 1999 by the Richmond Federal Reserve that 45% of all liabilities in the financial system were backed by the federal government. And it's the moral hazard aspect of this and the fact that we've compounded this going forward by bringing the Fed in deeper and further in terms of that moral hazard challenge, and I'd like your comment on that.
Certainly. On the issue of deflation, incidentally, and that was the reason, that the fear of deflation, that they had to keep interest rates very low. Ben Bernanke, before he was Fed chairman, was the one who gave a speech around 2002 warning of deflation, and he spooked the markets because no one else was talking about deflation at that time. So I think that was a hyped-up concern. But the moral hazard problem, I think, is the key problem, because how do we move forward from here plausibly claiming that, oh, listen, we've bailed you out up to this point, but if you fail tomorrow, that's it? I mean, how can this be taken seriously? And unfortunately, an institution like the Federal Reserve System, and when I get a question like this, I unfortunately have to delve into an aspect of the question that I had somewhat forsworn to discuss, but the Fed, in effect, institutionalizes this moral hazard problem because there's no physical limitation on the amount of money it can create to bail somebody out, and everybody knows that. And secondly, there's at least the possibility that there existed the Greenspan put. People knew, Greenspan is not going to let things go under. He comes to the rescue of long-term capital management in 1998. Do you think some of these firms would have been in the shape they were in by the time they started collapsing? If long-term capital management had been allowed to collapse and they realized, wait a minute, the game is up, we actually have to run sensible enterprises, it's worth asking, why are equity ratios so low in the financial sector? We're being told about we need higher capital requirements and so on. Well, that may be a good idea, but we should ask the more fundamental question, why are they so low? Why aren't they so low in the shoe industry or the shellfish industry or the hat industry? And the answer is they don't have lenders of last resort that have the ability to bail them out. And even the International Monetary Fund acknowledged this in April 2008 in a report. They said that the financial sector is depending much too much for its liquidity problems on an expected intervention by the monetary authority. So this is a very significant problem, especially because in the wake of some of the decisions that have been made, the too big to fails have become even bigger. So we've not solved the problem. The problem is hanging over the...
You've actually compounded it, because if we give the Fed then a secondary responsibility which is to try to overcompensate for businesses that might go bust. They might do that by setting the interest rate too low, long-term capital management being a case in point. So the more of this responsibility you put on their shoulders, the more you lessen their focus on keeping a stable monetary unit. And keeping a stable monetary unit long-term is the thing that's going to bring about, the most market discipline, the most long-term, long-range planning, the least amount of waste in the system in terms of destruction, because you don't have a boom-bust cycle. What we're doing is compounding the cyclical, the depth of those cycles, basically. Would you concur with that? And I want to make one last point. I think that getting Congress involved in this would sort of compound the problem, whether it's on the issue of unemployment or whatever good cause we're trying to involve ourselves in. The likelihood is that we're going to further that extension of boom and bust in the cycle.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, this is how Hayek won the Nobel Prize in 1974 for arguing that if you set interest rates artificially, well, look, interest rates aren't arbitrary. And if you set them artificially, you're just opening yourself up for massive errors by everybody, businessmen, investors, consumers, and that's exactly what's happened to us.
Thank you.